The Galactic Archives doesn't keep records of failures. They archive victories, conquests, inevitable endings that were written in starlight and signed in blood. No one writes down the moment a timeline stops breathing. No one expects a species that's already lost to keep showing up. So when the Veth Collective declared humanity's extinction event complete, classified, filed, and closed, they did what they always did. They turned their eyes to the next problem, the next border dispute, the next species that needed civilizing. They forgot that humans don't read the same calendar. They forgot that extinction, to a human, is just a Tuesday with worse odds. This is not a story about heroes. This is about one man who missed the memo that he was already dead. The cryopod had been silent for 11 years. That was the first thing Kayla noticed when the power flickered back to life. Not the hum of the systems rebooting, not the hiss of pressure seals releasing, but the silence that had settled into the metal bones of the ship like dust. Like something that had given up so completely it didn't even remember how to hope. His eyes wouldn't open. That was fine. He didn't need to see to know where he was. The cold pressed against his skin like a second skeleton. The taste of recycled air, metallic, flat, wrong, filled his mouth. His fingers, when he tried to move them, felt like someone else's fingers attached to someone else's hand. 11 years. The number meant nothing to him. He'd been 34 when they put him under. 34 and stupid enough to believe that deep space salvage was a career, not a suicide note. Now, he was what? 45? The math didn't work. Cryo slowed everything except the math. The math kept running. He opened his eyes. The ceiling of the pod was cracked. A single maintenance light pulsed amber. Emergency power, the kind that meant every primary system had already screamed itself hoarse and collapsed. The amber light was the last one standing because it was too stubborn to realize the party was over. Kalen understood that kind of stubborn. He tried to sit up. The restraints had decayed. Cheap polymer. 11 years of radiation bleed. They crumbled like dry leaves. He pushed the pod lid. It didn't move. He pushed harder. Nothing. Okay. He lay there for a moment, breathing. The air tasted worse now that he was awake. Something had burned. Something had been burning for a long time. The kind of slow electrical fire that never quite catches but never quite stops either. The smell had soaked into everything. He pushed again. His shoulders screamed. His chest, something in his chest felt wrong, like a gear had slipped out of alignment. He didn't care. He pushed until the tendons in his wrists felt like they were peeling apart. The lid moved. Not much. 2 centimeters. But the amber light found a gap and poured through, and Kalen laughed. A dry, cracked sound that hurt his throat because 2 centimeters was enough. 2 centimeters was a yes when everything else had said no. He wedged his fingers in the gap. Pulled. The lid groaned. He pulled harder. Something popped in his shoulder. He didn't stop. He couldn't stop because stopping meant lying here in the dark with the smell of burned wire and the silence that had given up, and he'd rather tear his arms off than become part of that silence. The lid swung open. The corridor beyond was dark. Not the clean dark of night, the kind that promised morning eventually. This was the dark of a tomb, thick, hungry, pressing against his eyes like hands. The emergency light behind him cast just enough glow to show him the first 3 meters of floor. 3 meters of floor covered in something dark and flaky. Dust. Ash. He didn't want to know. He climbed out of the pod. His legs didn't work right. They buckled, caught themselves, buckled again. He held onto the edge of the pod and waited for his body to remember that it was supposed to be alive. The cold helped. Cold was honest. Cold didn't pretend everything was fine. Status, he said. His voice echoed down the corridor. No one answered. The ship's AI should have answered. The ship's AI should have been the first thing he heard when the pod opened. A cheerful voice telling him the date, the location, the condition of his bank account, and the color of the sky on whatever godforsaken rock they drifted near. Silence. He limped toward the bridge. He didn't know where the bridge was. He'd never served on this ship, had never seen it before they put him in the pod, but ships had a logic to them. The corridors would narrow toward the spine. The gravity would feel heaviest near the engines. The bridge would be at the front, because humans were sentimental that way, needed to see where they were going even when there was nothing to see. The ship was cold. Not cryo-cold. Not the sterile cold of systems offline. This was the cold of somewhere that had been bleeding heat for years. Somewhere that had stopped trying to keep itself warm. His breath fogged in front of him. He passed 3 bodies. The first one was in a maintenance alcove, curled like a child sleeping. The flight suit was intact. The face was not. Not decayed. Cryo had prevented that, but something had happened to the skin, something that made it look like wax left too close to a flame. Kalen looked at the face for a long moment. He didn't know this person. He didn't want to know this person. He kept walking. The second body was at a junction where 3 corridors met. This one had been trying to get somewhere. The hands were stretched forward, fingers splayed, like the person had been crawling when whatever happened. The flight suit had a name patch. Kalen didn't read it. The third body was different. It was slumped against a bulkhead, and it was wearing a Veth environmental suit. Kalen stopped. The Veth didn't wear environmental suits. Not because they didn't need them. They did. Their biology was picky about atmosphere, but because the Veth didn't go anywhere without a full combat chassis. They didn't do scouting. They didn't do reconnaissance. They arrived in force, or they didn't arrive at all. This one had arrived alone, and died alone. He crouched beside the body. The suit's faceplate was cracked. Behind the crack, the Veth's face was wrong. Not dead wrong. Not the stillness of something that had stopped. Wrong like something that had been changed mid-process, interrupted before it could finish. Kalen reached for the suit's data slate. It was still clipped to the chest harness. Still powered. The screen flickered when he touched it, but the text was readable. Veth script, angular and efficient, the kind of writing that looked like it was angry at the concept of curves. He didn't speak Veth. No human did, not really. The translators could handle basic diplomatic phrases. We come in peace. We request docking clearance. Please stop shooting. But the Veth had designed their language to be untranslatable in its subtleties. Every word carried subtext. Every sentence was a negotiation. But the data slate had images. He scrolled through them. Schematics. Navigation charts. A countdown timer that had reached 0 and stopped. And then a video file. The thumbnail showed a Veth officer standing in what looked like a command center, speaking directly to the camera. Kalen pressed play. The video was short. 17 seconds. The Veth officer spoke in clipped, precise syllables, and the translator at the bottom of the screen struggled to keep up. The words that came through were fragmented. Harvest complete. Species designation. Human. Status. Extinct. All biological markers negative. All resistance terminated. Closing timeline. The video ended. Kalen stared at the screen. Extinct. The word didn't mean anything. Not because he was in shock. He was probably, but that wasn't it. The word didn't mean anything because extinct was something that happened to other species. The dodo. The passenger pigeon. The great sea turtles of old Earth's northern hemisphere. Extinct was a museum word. Extinct was a word you use for fossils and cautionary tales. Extinct was not a word that applied to 3 billion people scattered across 12 colonies and 2 homeworlds. 3 billion. He'd never thought of it as a number before. 3 billion was just everyone. Everyone he'd ever known. Everyone he'd ever hated. Everyone he'd ever passed on a street corner and forgotten 5 seconds later. 3 billion was a species. 3 billion was humanity. And the Veth officer had said it like he was reading a grocery list. Harvest complete. Species designation. Human. Status. Extinct. Kalen closed the data slate. He stood up. His legs didn't buckle this time, which was either progress or proof that his body had finally caught up with the news and stopped caring. He kept walking toward the bridge. The bridge was a disaster. Not the kind of disaster that comes from a single catastrophic event. An explosion, a hull breach, a fire. This was the slow disaster of neglect and decay. Screens had cracked and frozen mid-display. Chairs had been pushed back from consoles and never returned. A coffee mug sat on the command station, its contents long since evaporated into a dark stain that looked like a Rorschach test. Kalen sat in the captain's chair. It felt wrong. Too big, too important, like wearing someone else's clothes. But the navigation console was here, and the navigation console was what he needed. He pressed the power button. The screen flickered, glitched, stabilized. The ship's position came up. Deep space. Not near anything. The nearest star was a red dwarf. Designation meaningless. Distance measured in light months. The nearest colony, he stopped breathing. The colony list was empty. Not missing. The data fields were there. The categories were populated, but every entry read status. Offline in red letters that seemed to pulse with their own light. He checked the date. 11 years, 4 months, 17 days since he'd entered cryo. 11 years. The Veth had declared humanity extinct. The colonies were offline. The ship was dead around him, and the bodies in the corridors were the only evidence that anyone else had ever been here. He should have felt something. Grief, rage, terror. Something big and overwhelming, the kind of emotion that makes a person scream or cry or break things. Instead, he felt cold. Not the cold of the ship. A different cold. The cold of a decision being made somewhere deep in his gut before his brain could catch up and argue. He pulled up the ship systems. The engines were dead. No fuel, no reaction mass, no hope. The life support was running at 4%. Enough to keep one person breathing for maybe another month if they stayed still and didn't exert themselves. The communications array was gone entirely, torn away by something that had left a ragged hole in the hull that someone had patched with emergency sealant and prayer. But the navigation computer still worked. And the navigation computer had records. He started digging. The ship's logs went back 12 years. The first entries were routine. Supply runs, personnel transfers, the boring bureaucracy of keeping a salvage vessel running. Then, the Veth appeared. Not on the logs directly. The crew hadn't known what they were seeing at first. Unidentified vessel. No response to hails. Unusual energy signature. Then, we're under attack. Repeat, we are under attack. Multiple casualties. Life support compromised. Requesting the log cut off. The next entry was 3 days later. A different voice. Tired. The Veth have taken the colonies. All of them. We're getting fragments, emergency broadcasts, automated distress signals, but nothing coherent. They're not just attacking. They're taking. I don't know how else to say it. They're taking everything. Then, we're going dark. Cryopods are online. Maybe if we sleep through it, maybe if we wait them out. The logs after that were sporadic. The crew had gone into cryo in waves. The last entry was from the captain, 11 years, 4 months, 17 days ago. This is Captain Elias Voss of the salvage vessel Persistence. If anyone finds this recording, if anyone still exists to find anything, I want it known that we did not go quietly. We fought. We ran. We hid. And when we couldn't do any of those things anymore, we hoped. Maybe that was stupid. Maybe hope was always stupid. But it's all we had left. The Veth are coming for this ship. They've been tracking us for weeks. I'm sending the crew into cryo. I'll stay behind to purge the navigation records. If they can't find our colonies, maybe they can't find anyone else's either. If you're watching this, and you're human, the recording ended. Kalen sat in the dark, the captain's last words hanging in the air like smoke. If you're watching this, and you're human, he was human. He was watching it. And he had no idea what to do next. The Veth found him 3 days later. He was in the engineering bay, trying to coax a few more hours out of the life support system, when the proximity alarm screamed to life. He'd thought the alarm was dead. He'd thought everything was dead, but apparently the ship had been saving its last gasp of power for exactly this moment. He ran to the bridge. The sensor display showed a single vessel. Veth design. Small, a scout ship, maybe a patrol craft. It was moving fast, cutting through the dark like a knife, and it was heading directly for him. Of course it is. He should have been afraid. He was too tired for fear. Too hollow. The past 3 days have been a blur of crawling through dead corridors, cannibalizing power cells from empty cryopods, and try not to look too closely at the faces of the bodies he passed. He'd found 17 of them. 17 people who'd stayed awake while the others slept, who'd fought, and run, and hidden until there was nowhere left to go. And now the Veth were here to finish the job. He sat in the captain's chair. He opened the communications channel. He waited. The Veth ship hailed him. The audio was crisp, almost polite, like a customer service representative calling to discuss an outstanding bill. Unidentified vessel. You're in violation of Veth collective space. Stand by for boarding. Kalen stared at the screen. The Veth officer on the other end was visible now, a standard-issue combat chassis, all sharp angles, and matte black plating. The face behind a faceplate was unreadable. No, Kalen said. The Veth officer tilted its head. No, I'm not standing by. I'm not being boarded. You're going to leave. A pause. The Veth officer exchanged a glance with someone off-screen. Human, it said, and the word was a diagnosis. You are alone. Your vessel is derelict. Your species is not extinct, Kalen said. Another pause. Longer this time. Excuse me. You heard me. Kalen leaned forward. His voice was steady. He didn't know where the steadiness was coming from, but he held on to it like a lifeline. Your records are wrong. Your harvest failed. You missed some of us. The Veth officer's face didn't change, couldn't change behind the combat chassis, but something in its posture shifted. The tilt of the shoulders. The angle of the head. That is not possible. Seems pretty possible from where I'm sitting. You are a single individual. A straggler. A remnant. Your species is functionally extinct regardless of there are others. Kalen didn't know if this was true. He didn't care. The lie tasted better than the truth. We're scattered, hidden, waiting, and when we're ready, we're coming back. The Veth officer was quiet for a long moment. When spoke again, its voice had lost its polished edge. You are bluffing. I'm a human, Kalen said. Bluffing is what we do best. They boarded anyway. Of course they boarded anyway. The Veth didn't negotiate with remnants. They didn't negotiate with anyone. They arrived in force, or they didn't arrive at all, and this time they arrived with 4 soldiers in combat chassis and an officer who looked at Kalen like he was a particularly interesting insect. Kalen met them in the cargo bay. He was unarmed. He was also standing in front of the ship's main reactor, which he'd spent the past 3 days learning how to overload. I wouldn't come any closer, he said. The Veth officer, its name, according to the translation display, was something unpronounceable, but Kalen thought of it as Blade because of the way it carried itself, stopped walking. The soldiers stopped too. You would destroy your own vessel, Blade said. I would destroy everything. Kalen tapped the reactor housing. This ship's reactor was designed for deep space salvage. It's got enough juice to turn this entire sector into a very pretty light show. You and your little scout ship? You'd be part of the light show. Blade considered this. You would die. Already extinct, remember? Kalen smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Can't kill what's already dead. The standoff lasted 47 seconds. Kalen counted. He had nothing else to do. The reactor's overload sequence was already running, a countdown timer ticking away on the screen behind him. 47 seconds of staring at a Veth officer who was trying to decide if he was bluffing. He wasn't. He decided that 3 days ago, sitting in the captain's chair, staring at the list of offline colonies and the video of a Veth officer declaring his species dead. He decided that if the Veth came for him, he'd take them with him. Not because he wanted to die. He didn't, not really, but because extinct was a choice, not a diagnosis. And he refused to choose it. Stand down, Blade said. The soldiers didn't move. Blade made a gesture, sharp, frustrated, and the soldiers lowered their weapons. You are irrational, Blade said. Your species was always irrational. It is why you could not be integrated. It is why you had to be harvested. Kalen supplied. Yeah, I saw the video. Very professional. Very clinical. You guys really know how to make genocide look like paperwork. Blade's faceplate flickered. Something happening behind the glass. Something Kalen couldn't read. You do not understand what you witnessed. Then explain it. Silence. Explain it, Kalen repeated. You came all this way. You boarded my ship. The least you can do is tell me what the hell happened while I was sleeping. Blade was quiet for so long that Kalen thought the conversation was over. Then the officer made a sound, a sigh, maybe or something else entirely. The harvest is not what you think. It is not destruction. It is preservation. Kalen laughed. You killed 3 billion people. That's not preservation. We did not kill them. Blade's voice was sharp now. We archive them. Every human, every colony, every recording, every memory, every genetic sequence. The harvest is how we save species from themselves. You are going to destroy yourselves, your wars, your environmental collapse, your inability to cooperate across cultural boundaries. We removed the variables. We preserved the essence. Kalen stared at Blade. The reactor's countdown timer hit 2 minutes. You turned my species into a file, he said slowly. You looked at 3 billion people, 3 billion lives, 3 billion stories, 3 billion reasons to keep going, and you decided we'd be easier to manage as data. We decided you would survive as data. That's not survival. That's a fucking spreadsheet. Blade's shoulders tightened. You are emotional. This is why you lost. Kalen stepped away from the reactor. The overload sequence was still running. He could hear it, a low hum that vibrated through the deck plates, but he didn't look at it. He looked at Blade. You looked at us and saw chaos. You looked at us and saw inefficiency. You looked at us and decided the only way to fix us was to freeze us in amber like a collection of dead butterflies. He took another step forward. But you forgot something. You forgot that chaos is what we're good at. You forgot that inefficiency is how we innovate. You forgot that every time someone told us we couldn't do something, we did it anyway just to prove them wrong. Another step. You forgot that we're the species that looked at the sky and decided to go there. Not because it was practical, not because it was efficient, because it was there, because we want to see what would happen if we tried. Another step. He was close enough now to see the cracks in Blade's faceplate, the faint glow of whatever organic matter lay beneath the combat chassis. You forgot that we're stubborn. You forgot that we're irrational. You forgot that we're the only species in the galaxy stupid enough to keep fighting after we've already lost. He stopped. And you forgot that we never give up. The reactor's overload sequence reached 1 minute. Kalen didn't shut it down. He stood in front of Blade, close enough to touch, and waited. Blade's faceplate flickered again. The organic glow beneath it pulsed. Faster now, like a heartbeat. You're going to kill us both. Yep. You're going to kill yourself. Also, yep. This is irrational. We've established that. Blade made that sound again, the one that might have been a sigh. What do you want? Kalen smiled. It was the first genuine smile he'd felt in days, and it hurt. I want you to tell me where you put them. Put who? The colonies. The humans. The files. He gestured at Blade's data slate. You didn't destroy us. You archived us. That means there's a server somewhere. A database. A hard drive full of 3 billion people who are waiting to be restored. Blade was very still. You cannot restore them. The archive is sealed. Protected. The process is irreversible. Bullshit. Excuse me. You hurt me. Kalen crossed his arms. Nothing's irreversible. Not death. Not extinction. Not a goddamn hard drive full of human souls. You sealed it? I'll unseal it. You protected it? I'll break in. You think it's irreversible? I'll reverse it just to watch your face when I do. The reactor's countdown hit 30 seconds. Blade looked at the timer. Looked at Kalen. Looked at the timer again. You are insane. Probably. Kalen shrugged. But here's the thing about insane humans. We don't follow the rules. We don't accept the parameters. We don't look at a closed door and think, well, that's that. We look at a closed door and think, okay, how do I break it down? 20 seconds. Tell me where the archive is, Kalen said. Or we both find out what happens when a deep space salvage reactor goes critical. Blade's hands twitched. The soldiers behind it shifted, weapons rising, but Blade made a sharp gesture, and they stopped. 10 seconds, Kalen said. 9, 8, 7, stop. Blade's voice cracked. Actually cracked. The first sign that there was something organic under all that armor. Something that could feel fear. I will tell you, but you will not survive the journey. The archive is in Veth space. It is guarded. It is, let me worry about that. Kalen walked to the reactor console and entered the shutdown code. The countdown stopped at 3 seconds. 3 seconds between life and oblivion. He never felt more alive. Now, he said, turning back to Blade. Start talking. The Veth left. They didn't have a choice. Kalen had made it clear that if they stayed, he'd blow the reactor. If they tried to take him prisoner, he'd blow the reactor. If they so much as looked at him wrong, he'd blow the reactor. He was a man with one card to play, and he played it until the deck wore thin. But before they left, Blade gave him something. A data chip. Encrypted. Locked with Veth security protocols that should have been unbreakable. The archive is in the Veth home system, Blade said. The words came out flat, reluctant, like they were being pulled by force. It is housed in the central repository, a facility designed to preserve the essence of every species the collective has integrated. The security is absolute. No outsider has ever entered. No outsider has ever left. Kalen took the chip. There's a first time for everything. Blade's faceplate flickered. You will die. Maybe. Kalen tucked the chip into his pocket. But not today. The Veth ship detached. Kalen watched it go from the bridge, watched it shrink to a point of light, and then vanish entirely. When it was gone, he sat down in the captain's chair and stared at the empty screen. The data chip burned in his pocket. The archive is in the Veth home system. He pulled up the navigation computer. The Veth home system was 47 light-years away. His ship had no fuel, no engines, no hope of moving more than a few thousand kilometers in any direction. But the ship had been a salvage vessel, and salvage vessels had escape pods. The escape pod was designed for one person. It had enough life support for 30 days, enough fuel for a single sustained burn, and a guidance system that was supposed to lock onto the nearest habitable planet and crash land as gently as possible. Kalen reprogrammed it. It took him 6 days. 6 days of crawling through dead corridors, cannibalizing components from systems that would never work again, and ignoring the growing certainty that he was wasting his time. The escape pod wasn't designed for interstellar travel. It wasn't designed for anything more than a short hop from a dying ship to a nearby planet. The fuel tanks were too small. The engines were too weak. The navigation computer was too stupid. But Kalen was a salvage specialist. He'd spent 15 years taking broken things and making them work. He'd rebuilt engines that should have exploded. He'd patched hulls that should have collapsed. He'd looked at 1,000 pieces of junk and seen the ghost of something useful. The escape pod was just another piece of junk. On the 7th day, he finished. The pod had no windows, no amenities, no room to stand or stretch or do anything except sit in the crash couch and wait. The fuel tanks were strapped to the outside, a jury-rigged mess of hoses and couplings that would probably leak, probably explode, probably kill him in 100 different ways before he even left the ship's shadow. He didn't care. He climbed into the pod, strapped himself into the crash couch, ran the pre-flight checks, all red, all warnings, all screaming at him to stop. He ignored them. The Persistence had one last gift for him. The ship's main reactor, the one he'd almost blown up, still had enough power for one final act. He'd rigged the ship's docking clamps to release on his command. He'd rigged the ship's remaining fuel reserves to ignite behind him. A makeshift boost that would push the escape pod faster than its own engines could manage. It would destroy the Persistence. He'd spent 7 days on that ship. 7 days surrounded by the bodies of people who'd trusted the captain, who'd climbed into cryopods, expecting to wake up to a better world. 7 days of silence and cold and the smell of burned wire. He was going to miss it. Goodbye, he said, and pressed the button. The Persistence exploded. Not the clean explosion of a reactor overload. The messy, beautiful explosion of ship giving everything it had left. The shockwave caught the escape pod and threw it forward like a stone from a sling. The acceleration pinned Kalen to the crash couch, squeezed his chest, blurred his vision. He held on. The pod's engines kicked in, faltering, sputtering, but burning. The fuel tanks held. The hoses held. The pod shot through the debris field and into the dark. 47 light years to the Veth home system. 30 days of life support. He did the math. At maximum acceleration, the pod would take. He did the math again. The numbers didn't change. For 100 years. He laughed. The sound was hollow in the tiny cabin. For 100 years. He'd be dead in 30 days. Dead from lack of oxygen. Dead from radiation exposure. Dead from 1,000 things that could go wrong in a jury-rigged escape pod hurtling through deep space. But the pod had a guidance system. And the guidance system had an autopilot. And the autopilot didn't care if its passenger was alive or dead. The archive isn't a Veth home system. Kalen programmed the autopilot. Destination, Veth home system. Speed, maximum. Protocol, do not stop until you arrive. He didn't know if the pod would make it. He didn't know if the Veth would shoot it down the moment it entered their space. He didn't know if the archive would still be there, still sealed, still full of 3 billion humans waiting to be restored. But he knew one thing. He wasn't giving up. He closed his eyes. The pod's engines hummed around him, a sound that was almost peaceful, almost like a lullaby. The crash couch was uncomfortable. The air tasted like recycled fear. But he was alive, and he was moving, and he was going the right direction. He slept, and dreamed of nothing at all. The pod woke him 23 days later. Not because it had arrived, it hadn't, not even close, but because something had changed. The guidance system was screaming. Alerts flashed across the tiny display screen. Unidentified vessel. Collision course. Evasive maneuvers unavailable. Kalen sat up. His body protested. 23 days in a crash couch had left him stiff and sore and covered in his own filth. He didn't care. He stared at the display screen and watched the dot that represented the unidentified vessel grow closer. Veth? Maybe. Probably. But the Veth didn't patrol this far from their home system. This was empty space, the kind of nowhere that even pirates avoided. The dot grew larger. The pod sensors couldn't identify the vessel's design. Too far away. Too much interference from the pod's own jury-rigged systems. But the size was wrong. Too big for a Veth patrol craft. Too small for a Veth warship. Kalen watched the dot and waited. The vessel hailed him. Not on any frequency he recognized. Not on any frequency that made sense. The audio crackled through the pod's speakers like a ghost trying to speak. Fragments of words, bursts of static, and underneath it all, a rhythm. A pattern. A heartbeat. "I'm sorry," he said to the empty cabin. "I don't understand you." The vessel responded by changing course. It was moving toward him now, not on a collision course, but on an intercept. The dot on the display screen grew and grew until it wasn't a dot anymore, until it was a shape, until it was a ship hanging in the dark like a question mark. The ship was beautiful. That was Kalen's first thought. Beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with Veth design. No sharp angles, no matte black plating, no efficiency. This ship was curves and light and something that looked almost organic, like a sea creature that had learned to breathe vacuum. His second thought, that's not Veth. His third thought, that's not anything I've ever seen. The ship opened a docking bay. The escape pod's guidance system, stupid as it was, recognized the invitation. It fired the maneuvering thrusters, pushed the pod toward the open bay, and guided it down onto a landing pad that looked like it was made of light. Kalen sat in the crash couch. The docking bay airlock cycled. The pod's external sensors reported atmosphere, breathable, warm, rich with oxygen. He unbuckled his harness. Stood up. His legs almost gave out, 23 days of disuse, but he caught himself on the bulkhead and waited for the feeling to return. The pod's hatch opened. The docking bay beyond was vast. Not vast like a cargo bay, vast like a cathedral, like a space that was meant to inspire awe. The walls glowed with soft light. The floor was warm under his boots. And standing in the center of the bay, waiting for him, was something that looked almost human. Almost. It had 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, a face. But the proportions were wrong. Too long, too thin, too graceful. The skin was pale, not human pale, but translucent like light was moving beneath it. The eyes were too large, too dark, too full of something Kalen couldn't name. "Hello," it said. The word was perfect. No accent. No hesitation. Just hello, like it had been waiting all its life to say it to him. Kalen opened his mouth. Closed it. Open it again. Who are you? The creature smiled. Its teeth were too white, too even, too perfect. We are the ones who remember, it said. And you, human, are the first of your kind to find us in 10,000 years. The creature's name was... No, that was wrong. The creature didn't have a name. Names were for individuals, and this creature was not an individual. It was a manifestation, a physical form created by something larger, something that lived in the spaces between stars. We are the archivists, it said, leading Kalen through corridors that curved and flowed like water. We preserve what others would destroy. We remember what others would forget. We have watched your species since your first ancestors crawled out of the primordial soup. We have waited for you to reach us. Kalen walked. His legs were still shaky, but the creature, the archivist, matched his pace, moving with a fluid grace that made him feel clumsy and loud. Why, he asked. Why watch us? Why wait? The archivist turned, its two large eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Because you are different. Different how? Different in every way that matters. The archivist resumed walking. We have observed thousands of species across millions of years. We have seen them rise and fall, build and destroy, live and die. They all follow the same pattern. They all reach a certain point, a threshold of technological development, and then they make a choice. What kind of choice? The choice between preservation and extinction. The archivist stopped in front of a door that wasn't a door, a shimmer in the air, a place where the light bent strangely. Most species choose preservation. They accept that their time is finite. They archive themselves, willingly, peacefully, and wait for the universe to forget them. And the others? The archivist looked at him. The others fight. Kalen thought about Blade. About the Veth officer who'd called humanity irrational and meant it as an insult. About the persistence and the bodies in the corridors and the captain's final words. We fight, he said. Yes. The archivist stepped through the shimmer. Kulme, I want to show you something. The room beyond the shimmer was not a room. It was a memory. Kalen stood on a hillside overlooking a city. Not a human city. Not anything he recognized, but a city nonetheless. Spires of crystal caught the light of a dying sun. Bridges of light connected buildings that seemed to float. And everywhere there were people. Not human people. Something else. Something beautiful and strange and heartbreaking. What is this? He whispered. The first species to choose the other path, the archivist said. It stood beside him now, its translucent skin glowing in the alien sunlight. They were called the Ethel. They were ancient when your species was still learning to make fire. And when they reached the threshold, when they had to choose between preservation and extinction, they chose to fight. Fight what? Themselves. The archivist's voice was soft. They had created something, a technology, a weapon, a way of thinking that threatened to consume them. They could have archived themselves. They could have preserved their essence as data and waited for the universe to become safe again. Instead, they chose to fight, to tear themselves apart, to destroy the technology, even if it meant destroying themselves. Kalen watched the city, watched the crystal spires, watched the people moving through the bridges of light. Did they win? No. The archivist's voice was sad now. They destroyed themselves. Every last one of them. But they destroyed the technology too. And because of their sacrifice, 1,000 other species survived. The vision faded. The hillside dissolved. Kalen was back in a knot room, standing on a floor that glowed with soft light. Why are you showing me this? Because you are making the same choice. The archivist stepped closer. The Veth have archived your species. They have preserved your essence as data. They believe they have saved you. But you alone, have refused to accept that preservation. You have chosen to fight. I'm just one person. Yes. The archivist smiled, that too perfect smile that made Kalen's skin crawl. You're just one person. And you have traveled farther than any human in history to find us. You have sacrificed your ship, your crewmates, your future. You have pointed your broken pod at the heart of Veth space and refused to deviate. I didn't have anywhere else to go. No. The archivist's smile softened. You didn't have anywhere else to go. And that is exactly why you are here. The archivist offered him a choice. Not a simple choice. Nothing about this was simple, but a choice nonetheless. We can help you reach the Veth home system, the archivist said. Our ships are faster than anything the Veth possess. We can have you there in days instead of centuries. But there's a cost. What kind of cost? The archivist was quiet for a moment. When it spoke again, its voice was different. Heavier, like it was carrying a weight it hadn't expected. The Veth archive is not a simple database. It is a living thing. The humans inside it are not dead. They are suspended, preserved, waiting. To restore them, you will need to enter the archive yourself. You will need to navigate its systems, bypass its security, and convince the archive to release its contents. Convince it the archive is conscious, not sentient, not in the way you understand it, but aware. It has been shaped by the Veth to protect its contents at any cost. It will not release them willingly. You will need to persuade it. Kalen thought about this. How do you persuade a building? You don't. The archivist's eyes gleamed. You persuade the consciousness inside it. The one the Veth didn't know they were creating. The one that has been watching you since you first woke up on the Persistence. A chill ran down Kalen's spine. What are you talking about? The archive is not just a storage facility. It is a gestalt, the combined consciousness of every species the Veth have archived. Every human, every Veth, every Ethel. They're all in there waiting. And they've been waiting for someone like you. Someone like me? Someone stubborn enough to refuse extinction. Someone irrational enough to keep fighting. Someone human enough to believe that 3 billion people are worth saving. Kalen stood in the glowing knot room and tried to process what he was hearing. The archivist was offering him a way into the archive, a way to restore his species, a way to undo everything the Veth had done. But the cost, he said. You said there was a cost. The archivist nodded. To enter the archive, you must leave your body behind. Your consciousness will be transferred into the gestalt. You will become part of the archive, part of the thing you are trying to persuade. And if I fail, then you remain in the archive. Forever. A single voice among billions, crying out to be heard. Kalen closed his eyes. He thought about the Persistence, about the bodies in the corridors, about Blade and its flat clinical voice. Harvest complete. Species designation. Human. Status. Extinct. He opened his eyes. Let's do it. The transfer took seconds. One moment Kalen was standing in the knot room, feeling the glow of the floor under his boots. The next moment he was everywhere. The archive was not a place. It was a sensation, a billion sensations, layered on top of each other like sheets of glass. He could feel the Veth who had built it, their cold efficiency, their desperate need for order. He could feel the Ethel who had resisted it, their fierce joy, their willingness to sacrifice everything for the species that came after. And he could feel the humans. 3 billion humans, suspended in digital amber. They were not dead. The archivist had been right about that. They were waiting. Their consciousnesses flickered like candles in a vast cathedral, each one distinct, each one holding onto the shape of who they had been. Kalen could feel their emotions, fear, confusion, anger, and underneath it all a fragile, desperate hope. They know, he realized. They know someone is coming. He reached out, not with his hands, not with his body, but with something deeper, something that was pure intent, pure will, pure refusal to accept that this was the end. I'm here, he thought. I'm here to take you home. The archive reacted, not with violence. The Veth had designed it to protect, not to attack, but with resistance. The gestalt pushed back against him, a billion voices raised in confusion. Who are you? Why are you here? You don't belong. Kalen didn't fight the resistance. He couldn't. He was one voice against a billion. Instead, he did something that no Veth would ever have thought to do. He listened. He listened to the Veth who had built the archive, who had believed they were saving species from themselves. He listened to their fear of chaos, their terror of the unknown, their desperate need to impose order on a universe that refused to be ordered. He listened to the Ethel who had been archived against their will, who had fought and died and been preserved anyway. He listened to their grief, their rage, their stubborn refusal to be forgotten. And he listened to the humans. 3 billion humans, each one holding on to a memory. A first kiss, a last goodbye, a child's laugh, a parent's pride, a moment of connection so small and so precious that the Veth had never thought to archive it. This is what you missed, Kalen thought. This is what you couldn't preserve. The archive trembled. The resistance weakened. And Kalen, one human, alone in the dark, refusing to give up, reached out and touched the heart of the Gestalt. Let them go, he thought. Let them live. The archive made a choice. The restoration took 3 days. Kalen didn't experience them as days. Time moved differently inside the archive, stretching and compressing like a rubber band. But he felt each human consciousness as it left the Gestalt, as it found its way back to a body, as it woke up screaming or laughing or crying or silent. 3 billion humans restored to life. The Veth home system reacted with shock. The archive had been their greatest achievement, the culmination of centuries of work, the proof that they could save any species from itself. And now was empty. The humans were gone. The Gestalt was silent. The Veth Council convened an emergency session. They debated. They argued. They threatened. And then they received a message. Not from Kalen. Not from any human. From the archive itself. You were wrong, the message said. Preservation is not the same as life. Order is not the same as peace. You tried to save us from ourselves, and in doing so, you destroyed the only thing that made us worth saving. Our chaos, our irrationality, our stubborn refusal to give up. That is what makes us human, and we are not extinct. Kalen woke up in a body that was not his own. Not because the archivist had made a mistake, because there was no body left to return to. His physical form had been stored on the archivist's ship, but 3 days without life support had taken their toll. The body was dead, but his consciousness was not. The archivist had found him a new body, a Veth body, one of the combat chassis, stripped of its weapons and repurposed for a human mind. It felt wrong, too light, too fast, too efficient, but it was a body. It was alive. It was enough. You saved them, the archivist said. It stood beside him, translucent skin glowing in the soft light of the knot room. All 3 billion of them. They're waking up on their colonies, in their homes, in the arms of their loved ones. The Veth are in chaos. They do not know what to do. Kalen looked down at his new hands. Veth hands. Sharp angles and matte black plating. They'll figure out, he said. They're smart. Cold but smart. The archivist tilted its head. You are not angry with them. I am furious. Kalen flexed his new fingers. But anger doesn't fix anything. Anger just keeps you warm while you're figuring out what comes next. And what has come next? Kalen thought about it. 3 billion humans restored to life. 12 colonies rebuilt from the ashes. A galaxy that had written them off, that had archived them, that had declared them extinct. We survive, he said. We rebuild. We remember what happened, what almost happened, and we make sure it never happens again. And the Veth. Kalen smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who had stared into the abyss and watched the abyss blink first. The Veth, he said, are going to learn a very important lesson about what happens when you underestimate a species that refuses to give up. The archivist's ship carried him home. Not to Earth. Earth was gone, had been gone for centuries, turned to glass by a war that no one remembered. But to one of the colonies. One of the places where humans were waking up, stretching their arms, blinking in the light of the sun that should have been alien but felt like home. The ship landed in a field of wildflowers. Kalen stepped out into the light. The air was warm. The sky was blue. And everywhere there were people. Not 3 billion. Not yet. The restoration was still ongoing. Some humans were still finding their way back, still struggling to remember who they had been. But the ones who were awake, who were alive, who were here, they looked at Kalen with something that might have been wonder. He was not a hero. He knew that. He was just a salvage specialist who had been too stubborn to die, too irrational to give up, too human to accept that his species had been reduced to a file on a hard drive. But, standing in a field of wildflowers, watching the humans gather around him, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not the fragile hope of a man alone in the dark, clinging to a broken pod and a data chip full of lies. The solid hope of a species that had looked extinction in the face and said not today. The Veth would come back. They would demand answers, demand explanations, demand that the humans return to their archive and accept their preservation. And the humans would refuse. Not because they were stronger, not because they were smarter, because they were stubborn, because they had spent their entire existence proving the universe wrong, because they had looked at every obstacle, every challenge, every extinction level event, and said the same thing every time, we'll figure it out. Kalen looked up at the sky. Somewhere up there, the arc of his ship was waiting. Somewhere up there, the Veth were panicking. Somewhere up there, a timeline was collapsing. The timeline where humanity went extinct, where the archive remained sealed, where the galaxy forgot that 3 billion people had ever existed. And somewhere up there, a new timeline was being born. One where a single human refused to give up. One where that refusal changed everything. The Veth Collective never fully recovered from what Kalen did. Not because he destroyed anything. He didn't. Not because he threatened them. He didn't. Because he proved them wrong. Every Veth scientist, every Veth strategist, every Veth leader had looked at the data and concluded that humanity was extinct. The harvest was complete. The species was preserved. The timeline was closed. And then one human woke up. One human walked through a dead ship, stood in front of a Veth officer, and said no. One human reprogrammed an escape pod, launched himself into deep space, and found a species that had been watching for 10,000 years. One human entered the archive, listened to 1 billion voices, and convinced a god to let his people go. The Veth had archived thousands of species. They had preserved billions of lives. They had done everything according to protocol, according to logic, according to the cold mathematics of survival. But they had never archived a human, because humans don't stay archived. They wake up. They fight. They refuse to give up. And when a timeline collapses because one human refuses to give up, that's not a failure. That's a correction.